Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News Canada. Today is Election Day, Monday, August 18th, 2025. We're going to be looking at the Battle River Crowfoot by-election, which is happening later today in Canada. Election Time News, your one-stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. Also, make sure to follow the Substack threads, Instagram, and X, where you can be first to get election news from all three countries. We were among the first to break the news of Sherrod Brown's election announcement, so make sure to be on board and always get this news first. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. We've seen there's always something going on. So, on to the video here. We can see that obviously we have the um we have the election here, generally Poilievre versus Spady for the Liberals. Now, it's not going to be very competitive, obviously. As you can see, last election, 82.84% for the Conservatives. That's actually an increase, though, as we can see from the 338 Canada. It's actually an increase from 2021, where there actually was a relatively large percentage of the People's Party of Canada vote, almost 10%. The NDP also got almost 10%. So that's going to be an interesting thing to note there. The Liberals gained from the NDP and the Conservatives from the PPC, most likely. So now we're going to end up with their projection of 875 to 10 to 10. Generally, it's going to be relatively low. Independents basically get zero most of the time, but now at the longest ballot committee, it in theory could be relatively high. So it's vacant because we have a Damien Kurek resigned, so that Poilievre could end up taking this seat after Poilievre actually lost to Fanjoy in Carleton, Ontario. He was the leader of the Conservative Party, so this was a huge blow to the Conservatives. So now we end up with the resignation was about a month after that. They officially declare it vacant the following day. The writ of the elections are dropped, and then we end up with a bit of a slow turn to the election. We have 14,454 advanced voting, which is generally just going to mean that that's basically just voting early. 13% of the riding's population has voted early. So it doesn't mean all that much. It just means that it's not going to be a ridiculously low turnout election. It's probably going to not be extremely high though. But either way, it's going to still be very safe for the Conservatives. The general question is how much so? Because obviously, if they end up underperforming and the Liberals end up doing better, then that's going to not only mean a lot for Poilievre, obviously, being that he'd be being elected in this scenario, in this riding, but also that they're continuing to do poorly even after the Liberal Party had a huge blowout election not that long ago. So they're still establishing themselves in the government. So then they're going to have the incumbency factor, both the positives and usually the negatives when talking about national effects. So now what we go into is the general race details themselves. And so we're looking at here is again on 338 Canada because he was 85.6% in 2019. If we generally look at the map across Canada in the 2019 Canadian federal election, it was quite a bit of it wasn't a very strong conservative year by any means, but it wasn't poor either. They did gain 26 seats from 2015. So this was a relatively strong year compared to years past. The NDP lost 15 seats, beginning their slow drop. But and look back to 2015, the Liberals did very well. They gained 148 seats after the NDP had actually been in the lead in 2011, actually been Conservatives. With 166. The NDP actually was at 103. And so then at this point in time, they did end up, the Liberals had a huge comeback. And so that's really going to be the turnaround point for the Liberals. And they've been leading since then. but by a much narrower amount. This was still a strong blue year, so that's going to be why it's relatively high. The Liberals were relatively low at this point in time, and it didn't really change much. There was just increased support for the NDP and the PPC in 2021. There's another election called. The Liberals gained 5 seats, even though they actually lost the national popular vote by 200,000 votes. The NDP actually did gain a seat. So that's going to be the 6 gained seats there. So that's going to mainly just be the effect of a return for a bit more of extremism, not necessarily in any strong sense, but the more extreme conservative party and the more extreme liberal party did end up gaining a lot of traction in 2021 at the expense of the more central ones, as they actually ended up losing 6%. And they actually did gain 0.2%, but that's really not much of an interesting factoid there, as there's not much they could have done. The Greens actually did lose a bit. And so then we actually do end up having the 0.2% decrease for the Greens. The PPC collapsed to 1.6%. The NDP dropped all the way down to 3.2. That's going to be coalescing support that we saw across the board in the national elections in 2025. That we did end up seeing there, obviously. So that's going to be a 17-seat gain, 24 for the Conservatives, as they're coalescing somewhat towards a two-party system away from the NDP. The PPC continue to have basically no seats whatsoever. And so that's going to end up being the main matchup here. But there is the longest ballot committee does actually have over 200 candidates here. So there's a total of 214. That annihilates the previous record of 91, setting the exact same election, the exact same riding that Poilievre had actually run in 20 earlier this year, believe it or not. So they're kind of following him around, you could say. So now they actually elections candidates decided to do is a write-in ballot with the full list of candidate provided at polling stations, which means that that's actually going to end up making the independents actually suffer a lot more, honestly. So 10% is quite a bit of an overestimation. It's probably going to be closer to around 0.5%, even less than the more established partisan ones. But the main contest obviously is going to be between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Well, it's the second time I've done that. And so I'm still in Australia mode, I guess. And so based on the Liberals generally aren't really going to have much of a shot here. Again, 82 points. That would end up having to be a 45% or more shift towards the Liberals. Now, that hasn't literally never happened, but that would be absolute, almost absurd. So, what we're going to be looking at for the final prediction here is going to be an 83.2% vote share for the Conservatives. This is going to be a bit of a coalescing and a bit of an increase, actually a slight decrease. No, that's actually an increase by 0.4%. That's going to be coalescing around the idea of Poilievre. Obviously, he's the leader of the Conservatives. They're going to want to put him back in. He's not necessarily unlike from what I've seen from the polls as well, and so they're going to be trying to focus on getting him back into Parliament. So they're going to coalesce around him and be able to get that low turnout. But the Liberal Party is also actually expected to gain 0.2%. This is because, again, it's the leader of the Conservative Party. Not necessarily by that much, though. It's going to be by a nominal amount, if anything. And so the NDP, 2.8%, that's going to be losing a little bit more. They've continued to lose support over the past few months. The People's Party is going to drop down even more, 1.6 to 1.1. The Greens down to 0.7%, which actually isn't really much any of a loss there because there's not much left to lose at this point. And the independents are basically non-existent at that point. They're ridiculously small because it's such a long ballot. I wouldn't be surprised. I could either see it being around basically 0% for independents or up to about almost 5%. But that would just be basically shrinking this entire graph a little bit to 95% of its size. So this is the projection for the 2025 election, the by-election in Battle River Crowfoot, being 83.2% for the Conservatives there. So that's going to be a resounding victory, obviously, And so that's going to be an interesting race to watch. So exactly how much this could vary by, probably plus or minus about 5%. They have eight here, 4, 6, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to say probably about 5%, almost across the board. Obviously not for the People's Party. They're not going to get up to 7%. NDP is not going to get 7.8. But um, essentially for the Conservatives, I could see anywhere from 80 to, I don't know why it's going to be down. I think it's going to be down by 75. I'd be surprised if it's anywhere near 70. So it's going to be 70 or more for the Conservatives, and then probably 10% or more for the Liberals. So the question is exactly going to be how this balances. This is going to say a good bit about how the nation is viewing the current liberal government, how well they might be able to do in the future based off of their record, and where things can go from here. This is not going to be the end all be all. Obviously, there's going to be definitely nationwide opinion polling. This is only one area, so it's somewhat. It's also a relatively low turnout, so it's a bit of sampling bias, but still going to be the almost the first checkpoint of the current Carney government, and we will see from here how they end up being able to make it work out. So it's going to be an interesting race to say the least, even though it is a one riding by election in the middle of August. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you are in Battle River Crowfoot, make sure to go vote. And again, follow on all of the platforms, subscribe below, and have a fantastic rest of your day.